Hi, welcome back. In this session, we will be looking at excuse me. Welcome back. In this session, we will be looking at enhancing a file to a file RFC file scenario that we built in our previous exercise, but we will be looking at a little different version of the same here. In the previous exercise, if you remember, the input file had only one user ID, but in this case, let's assume that the input file has multiple user IDs, right? And the requirement is for each user ID in the file, PI should make a call to the SAP backend, make an RFC call. So if there are 3 users in the file, PI should make 3 RFC calls to SAP and create correspondingly 3 response XML files in the backend in the file system. If that is the requirement, all the BPM flows that we built continue to remain the same. Basically, in that case, the way the flow would work is the sender file adapter picks up the file, sends it to PI, and the BPM receives the file. Internally, the BPM will split the file into multiple files or into multiple messages, and for each message, BPM would then send the message to PI and then from PI to ECC, and that each response would then create a file. So from an integration directory and from a processing perspective, the logic remains the same, right? But the change lies in the way the BPM is designed to be able to split the message into multiple messages and get the responses and then push the responses back, right? So in terms of enterprise service repository, we would continue to use the BAPI user get details. We will have the file request and the file response, and what the difference between the previous file RFC file scenario and this scenario is going to be that you will build an intermediate data type called file intermediate. The reason is this request will contain 3 user IDs or 5 user IDs, whereas the intermediate structure would then have only 1 user ID, and excuse me, and equivalent to that data type, you will have one message type called intermediate, and equivalent to that message type, you will have one service interface called abstract asynchronous. Okay, and then we will have one new mapping to be able to split the input request file into the intermediate file. All right, so with that, let's get started and let's start building our enterprise service repository objects. So I'm within my software component. I'm going to create a new namespace. So I'm going to call it namespace http://training.com/ccBPM /file RFC file underscore multi underscore 00. All right, I'll call the same name. I'll take the description, put the description here for multiple user IDs. So with that, our namespace has been defined. Now let's go ahead and define our data type. So instead of creating a data type from the scratch, I'm going to just copy these 2 data types, file request, copy object. So I'm copying it from my file to RFC file to my other namespace, which is file RFC file multiple. So I've copied my data type. Excellent. I'm same way copying the response as well. Okay, my response data type is also copied. All right, next, if you look at the data type, we have to create an intermediate data type. So let's go ahead. I'm going to call it dt underscore file underscore intermediate underscore 00. Let's okay, and then here I'm going to create insert sub element user ID. Hold on, I think we might have a problem with our request message. We'll look at that. So user ID, and I save that, right? But if I look at the file request, like we discussed, the file request needs a change. The file request is now going to be multiple. You're going to have multiple user IDs. So let's just delete this. Okay, I'm selecting this, I'm deleting it. I'm saying insert element, sub element. I'm saying users. Okay, the users can occur multiple times because you're going to have multiple users in one file. and then insert sub element of user ID, right? Type XSD string. Perfect. All right, so this is my input file structure. I'm going to get an input file structure with multiple users, and each user will have one ID, and my response is going to contain first name, last name, middle name, and response, and my intermediate structure will only contain one user ID. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and start creating our message types. Okay, empty underscore file rec underscore 00, and I'm going to drag my data type and put the same here. Likewise, I'm going to say empty underscore file res underscore 00. I'm going to naming convention is not followed, so I'm going to say do not save. I have to put a name, file resp underscore 00. Perfect. Now I'm going to drag my data type. Perfect. Now I'm minimizing this, so we are just looking at that. To make it more easy for you to see this, because otherwise it's at the bottom, I'm just gonna say restore default, and then when I do that, I'm also going to select this guy. There's a menu option that's missing. All right, we'll not waste time there. All right, so next I'm going to go into so two message types have been created. Next I'm going to go ahead, create a third message type, empty underscore file empty underscore file underscore intermediate underscore 00. Right, now this is going to use this data type as the request, response, and this is the user ID. Next, I'm going to create a service interface. I'm going to call it SIOA. I'm going to call the service interface as SIOA. Let's go into my namespace here. Okay, file request. Sorry. Right? File request. So this is going to get the request from the file system and send it to the ccBPM. It's outbound, asynchronous, and it will use the file request here. Okay, perfect. Next, I'm going to create one more service interface, SIIA file response. All right, and this file response is going to contain the response message type. All right, so it's going to be inbound. Sorry, I should change the direction as inbound, and then drag the file response to this. This is also done. Okay. Okay, our service interface outbound and inbound have been created. So now let's go ahead and now create our, let's look at here. So SIOA file request, and then this is going to be SIAA file request, because now the message is going to go into the BPM, right? So I'll call it the same name, file request. Say create, and I'm going to drag my file First we have to make it abstract. It's asynchronous, then I drag my file request here, right? And then if you see, there is going to be an intermediate SIAA file intermediate structure. That's the name of the service interface. So let's go ahead and create one new service interface. You will see why we need this intermediate service interface soon. So I'm going to call it SIAA file intermediate service interface. It's abstract, and its message type is going to be the intermediate message type that we created. Okay, so this is intermediate, and this also uses the intermediate message type. All right, next we need an abstract synchronous request for the BAPI. So I'm going to create a service interface that is abstract synchronous BAPI. All right, I say create. It's going to be abstract, it's going to be synchronous, and now I'm going to copy my intermediate structure as the request. So this is another change. Previously the request was empty file request, but because the file request has multiple users, it won't work for us. So we need to have only one request user ID. So empty file request is the request, and now I go here, I say BAPI user get detail as the response, and then I select it, I say apply. All right, so this is my synchronous service interface. Now let's create the synchronous service interface is done. So now two more service interfaces that need to be created. Let's go ahead, SIAA file response. Okay, now this is abstract asynchronous that contains my file response. So my file response is empty file response. Drag it, drop it, and save it. All right, the next service interface that we create, cancel it, I've done a mistake here. Let's go ahead. The last service interface is SIIA, service interface inbound file response. Okay, and I say create, right? I call it inbound asynchronous, and message type is going to be file response. Okay, so with that, my NTA structures and namespaces are created. Let's go ahead and activate our change list. Okay, there seems to be some issue with the SIAS BAPI. Oh, sorry, there's a mistake here. This should not be, this is the request. The response has to be empty file response. That's my mistake. Change. Okay. Basically, the SIAS BAPI, I had given the response structure to be incorrect, so I've activated the change now. So let's go ahead and activate the change. All right. So now before we go ahead and build the mappings, let's close everything. All right. What did we do? We had created a data type, and the data type has multiple users, and each user will have one user ID, right? That's the request data type. The response data type will have first name, last name, personal number, middle name. And then you have the intermediate structure, which will only contain one user ID of type string. Equivalent to the three data types, we created three message types. Next, we have to create 5 service interface, like the same as we did in the previous exercise. Outbound asynchronous that uses the file request. So if I go here, it's outbound asynchronous that uses the file request, then abstract asynchronous for the file request. So this is the abstract asynchronous for the file request, abstract asynchronous, and then I created one intermediate service interface called abstract asynchronous file intermediate that uses my intermediate structure, and then I have an abstract synchronous BAPI structure that uses my intermediate as the request and the response, and everything else followingly are the same service interfaces that we used. Okay, now I'm going to close all here and start my BPM development. All right, that we shall do in the next session, and I shall see you there. Bye-bye.